Do you want to know how economists think? Hi everyone, welcome to this video. This is the first video of several that will help you to think like an economist.
He's my favorite economist.
This particular video will set the scene. Who are the players in the macroeconomy? Let's get through all the mumbo jumbo of what economists normally say. I hope that this video will shed some light on our thinking. Sometimes it's even difficult for me to understand what my fellow economists say.
Still not funny.
Still not funny.
I promise to keep it as layman as possible so that anyone can understand even the basic principles of the macroeconomy. Welcome to part one of a series of videos where I will try and explain to you in as layman terms as possible how economists think. This particular video, part one, will deal with the players in the macroeconomy. Who are they? What characterizes them? And what is their purpose and what incentivizes them? So a good place to start is simple. Let's look at a particular family. Let's look at the Jones family. You have a family of four, and this family lives in a house, and their names are John the father, you have Michelle the mother, and their two kids, Zoe and Jaden. It's important that we start small because the economy is made up of all these small economic units, as we refer to, with the family unit being an example of this. Let's assume that John is a lawyer and Michelle is an accountant, and they have good jobs. They live in a comfortable house in a middle-class suburban area. And like any typical family, they have several decisions to make on a daily basis. And these decisions have an effect on their lives, whether today, tomorrow, or sometime in the future. These decisions include, for example, where to fill their car up with fuel, or where to shop for groceries, or where to buy pizza. They also pay for utilities such as water and electricity. And every now and then need to make bigger decisions, like should they buy a new car? Or maybe they need to change jobs. Should they change jobs? And should they enter a new career, for example? All of these decisions are made at a microeconomic level. In other words, the decisions of the particular economic unit, whether it's the family, whether it's a business, whether it's an individual. This example now with the Joneses deals with the family unit. So it's the decision of the Jones household. Now the series that I'm busy with deals with the macroeconomy. So we're not per se concerned about the microeconomic decisions, although of course they are important. But for purposes of these videos, the question is, what decisions do all the households make? In other words, all the families, all the firms, all the individuals on a macroeconomic level. And this is where it becomes interesting because there are many different types of families and they are all unique in their own particular way. And these families are spread across the whole of a particular country. They are spread in different regions. They are different according to age. They are different according to race. They are different according to gender. They are different according to economic status in terms of wealth, income, whatever it might be. Collectively then, this macroeconomy reflects the decisions of, in this case now, all the households. So one can think then that a lot of the detail is lost in the macroeconomic context because we don't analyze what each individual or each economic agent or each economic unit decides on their own. This is a limitation of macroeconomic policy analysis or macroeconomic analysis in general. And in a sense, it is understandable because as a policymaker, for example, we need to make decisions for the entire economy. We lose the detail of the decisions made by particular economic agents, by particular households, by particular firms, by particular individuals. One can almost understand that that would happen because we are trying to make decisions on the macroeconomy in the aggregate as opposed to the individual firm, the individual household, the individual economic agent. So let's go back to the Joneses for a moment. They decide they want to buy a particular house, and this is a big decision for them, as you would expect it to be. But the question is, what would happen if all families at once or over a period of time decided to buy houses? Or decided to buy cars, and different types of cars, whether Mercedes-Benz, BMWs, Audis, Ferraris, Toyotas, Fords, whatever, and food, different types of food, medication, technology, all these different types of consumable goods and services. What happens if they all decide to buy all of these products? This, as I mentioned a moment ago, would refer to spending by households on the macro level. If we aggregate all these products together, we would get to spending by households of consumable goods and services in this case, although the property, the house, would probably be regarded as private investment. More on that in a moment. The point is, this would be spending by consumers at a macro level. We will find that households or consumers are the largest spenders in the economy. We denote that for purposes in this video with the letter C. Now this is where it gets interesting, because these households, you and I as individuals or as a family unit, we offer our labor as a factor of production to firms. And our professions would typically include, for example, lawyers, accountants, bankers, carpenters, whatever it might be. We all have our specific areas of expertise or our skills, and we apply those skills by offering our labor to these firms, and in return we get a wage or a salary. So in a vibrant economy, we would expect that there would be many different professionals. We would expect that the skill set would be quite diverse, and collectively we would refer to this group as workers, as labor. In a more formal sense, when we typically refer to organized labor, we would be referring to labor unions. And these labor unions would typically have the best interests of labor at hand, you and I, our work, our employment. Although there is an argument, of course, in terms of the incentives that they would have, that their interests would lie only with their members, and in particular the paying members. So as labor, we supply our work to different types of firms, and these might include mines, banks, grocery stores, etc., in different industries, in different sectors, whether it's at a supermarket or a mining company or a construction company or a financial services company. Labor provides their services to these firms. Now, following on from these firms, they don't only employ you and I, workers, and pay us a wage, hopefully a fair wage and salary, but they also invest, and we refer to this investing in so-called real assets as capital formation. Now, when we are referring to real assets, we are referring to assets that you can, in layman's terms, feel and touch. It's tangible, and they generate a return based on the production of some sort of product. We therefore denote this capital formation or real assets with a capital I. Of course, it's not only firms that would invest in real capital formation. The government also is quite active in this regard. The next important player is the central bank, and the central bank's main purpose is to conduct monetary policy. And the central bank conducts this policy in the so-called monetary sector. The monetary sector as such, you can't feel, it's intangible. We would be referring to the money market, say, the capital market or the bond market, the share market, the stock exchange. And the purpose of this monetary policy by the central bank is to ensure that it achieves its mandate, which is often aligned to inflation targeting. In other words, either keeping inflation within a certain target band or at a certain level, 2% or 3%. But central banks cannot conduct monetary policy without commercial banks, because the commercial banks are those institutions that are directly in contact with the economy. So you have a situation where on a macro level, the central bank has a policy, and in order for it to achieve the policy, it requires and it needs commercial banks to be the link between the economy as such and the central bank. So in the example that I use here, we have 4 banks, Bank A, B, C, and D, and these banks would typically collect deposits, and they would use these deposits to grant loans. And these loans would be given to, for example, companies, small, micro, medium enterprises, businesses, households. So this gets right to the core of what a bank does in essence. A bank collects deposits in its liability book, which acts as its source of funding, and then it uses these liabilities to grant loans. So the asset book of the balance sheet refers to the use of funds. And this intermediation function is central to what a commercial bank does. Of course, granting these loans then to these firms, these households, invariably would result in capital formation in many cases, especially for your firms that want to expand their operations, although it could also be used for consumption purposes by households. But the fact that the loans are granted allows these firms the opportunity to use the funds and engage in some form of real capital formation. So the next important player in the macroeconomy is the government. And the government collects taxes, and it uses these taxes to spend in the economy. We denote taxes with a capital T, and we denote government spending with a capital G. So households, firms would all pay tax. The government would then use these tax revenues to implement its fiscal policy by spending it in various capacities in accordance with the fiscal policy of the day. Finally, in an open economy, you would have your importers and exporters as well as your investors. The exporters and importers would be trade related, and the investors would be capital related. So when we are talking about exporters, we denote that with an X. If we are referring to importers, we would denote that with an M. When we are referring to capital investors, or foreign capital investors rather, we would be using a K, and there are 2 types of foreign capital. The first one is your foreign direct investment, and the second type is your portfolio investment, PI. Now the FDI, the foreign direct investment, is normally longer term capital, more stable, and it enables some form of growth to occur in an economy because there is money invested in some form for a long period of time. On the flip side, however, portfolio investment is of a short-term volatile nature. So just as quick as it entered a particular economy, it can leave. In terms of the flow of funds, exports would be money that enters our economy via the exporters. Goods and services would leave our economy. For importers, the money or the funds will leave our economy, and the imported products would enter our economy. Therefore, we subtract imports. The FDI and the PI, depending on whether there is a net inflow or outflow for each respective one, would either be a positive or negative. It's often the case that when there is a deficit on the current account, in other words, the imports are greater than the exports, that particular country would be forced into a situation to have relatively higher interest rates to encourage capital flows. So to summarize then, the major players in the macroeconomy are your households, your government, your domestic investors, which would typically include your firms. Then you would have your foreigners, and these would further be subdivided into your exporters, your importers, your foreign direct investors, and your portfolio investors. Then you would have your central bank, which conducts monetary policy, and in order to do this, it would need commercial banks. So these commercial banks are essential for the central bank to achieve its mandate with regards to its monetary policy. So finally, we would have organized labor, which would include the labor unions in a more formalized sense. Right, so that's the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching. In this video, we looked at the major players. These players are essential to understand how the economy works in a macro sense. So the next couple of videos we'll see how these players interact with each other. I'll see you then in the next video. Cheers.